welcome to the Print Softcover, where we host the digital releases of new upcoming books. And today we have the release of the $10 trillion Dream Dented by Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, who's a former finance secretary, former economic affairs secretary to the government of India, and the person we're going to be in conversation with today. Thank you so much, Mr. Garg, for joining us.
Thank you, Sharad. I am so happy to be with you.
No, absolutely. And now the book covers various different themes. So I wanted to go theme wise on what you've covered in the book. The first is to do with fiscal management. Now, you make a very interesting point. You say that the Modi government holds the record both for the best fiscal deficit and the worst fiscal deficit. So, could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, it's a fact. So when it took over in 14-15 from the Congress government or the UPA government, in 13-14 the fiscal deficit was 4.5% or so, and it was high. It was coming off from the still higher levels in 2010, 11, 11, 12, but it was still very high. Then the government, led by Mr. Modi and with Arun Jaitley as finance minister, was very keen and decided. You have a look at the first budget itself, where they made a commitment that we'll bring down the fiscal deficit to very low level and something in the range of 3% or so. And they went about controlling the fiscal deficit as the Modi 1 rolled out. In 2018-19 budget, if you would recall, the government also brought in very serious amendments to the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act to institutionalize a fiscal deficit of 3% of GDP by 2021. So, and that was made statutory. The government also incorporated the debt to GDP goal of 40% for the central government by 24-25. So the first term was a kind of, which you can say, a fiscal hawk period where the government was very serious about controlling and limiting the fiscal deficit. A result of that was that in the first 5 years, and that was very well captured in the budget speech which Piyush Goyal read out for the interim 29-20 budgets, that the government has, and they claimed, and it was right, that the government ran the lowest fiscal deficit of any government since 1991. They also made a claim, which was also correct, that the besides fiscal deficit, the inflation had also been one of the lowest in many decades. So that is the track record of us. There was one deviation which I must point out, that the government had started resorting to some off-budget borrowings at that time, beginning 2016-17. The fully guaranteed bonds, fully serviced bonds, and some of these food subsidies being paid through the National Small Savings Fund or NSSF. That had its own element. I have analyzed that also in the budget, in the book. And even if you include that, the upgraded fiscal deficit, which I think around 3.8% or so of Modi 1.0, was the lowest amongst the governments since 1990-91, when we started sort of counting and disclosing fiscal deficit. On the other hand, Sharad, the Modi 2.0 was a complete contrast. Right from the first year, 2019-20, the government started relaxing the budget constraint. It was over 4% in
And this
the
sorry to interrupt, but this 2019-20, it's important to mention that this was the pre-pandemic year.
exactly. So this was pre-pandemic year. In that year itself, the government started sort of relaxing the fiscal, though it made a lot of noises. So if you see the 2021 budget, the government did make a lot of confirmations, affirmations that we'll stick to the fiscal deficit path. But in 21-22 budget, which was presented on 1st of February, the government completely lost the fiscal deficit. So to say, it completely gave away all restrictions, constraints. It did one good thing also at that time. That good thing was that it decided to bring off-budget borrowings into the fiscal books, and as a result, 2021 revised or final fiscal deficit was very high, 9% plus. And
Yes.
thereafter, for the next 2 years, the government ran fiscal deficit in excess of more than 6.4% every year. It's only in the last year, 23-24, that there was some reduction of bringing it less than 6% or so. But on the whole, the result was that Modi 2.0 ran a fiscal deficit of in excess of 6% or 6.4% or so, which is on record. And this includes clearing of the off budget, etc. And this is the highest fiscal deficit of any government, whether for 5 years or 2 years or 1 year, ran after 1991. So this is ironical, but true, that the same government, Modi 1.0, has the distinction of running the lowest fiscal deficit, but Modi 2.0 has the distinction of running highest fiscal deficit in the country.
Right. But some amount of leeway, I presume, can be given to the government because of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Not really. If you analyze the expenditures in great detail, the government did not spend much on COVID-19. The vaccine expenditure totaled about 35,000 crores only. On the health side, there was nothing, not a single rupee extra was spent. So if you try to sift out what expenditures can be attributed to COVID-19, you would finding that there was nothing. The primary reason why the government ran very large fiscal deficits in 3 years since 21-22 is its preference for the so-called capital expenditure. The capex is what went up, and here also I think we need to remember that the capex was also to a great extent substitution of the capex by the public sector undertakings themselves, and taken together. The public sector capex, which is the government budgetary capex, and the public sector taken together, in the 5 years, the growth was only about 6.5 or 7% in 5 years in Modi 2.0. And therefore, but it had massive impact on the fiscal deficit because the government decided to incur most of the capex through the budget and borrowed for that.
I understand. And so you've also said that India has comprehensively missed its goal of a $5 trillion economy. Now, again, how much of this can be attributed to the pandemic and how much to government action or inaction?
So this is again a fact, despite the fact that there was a good recovery in the later 2 years, when India could achieve the growth rate, 3 years rather. achieve the growth of 7% plus. In 1 year, it exceeded 8% also. But the overall 5 years growth is only 4.5%. And that had the bearing on missing the $5 trillion GDP goal, because the growth was low. The other factor which made contribution in India's missing this goal was India's relatively uh, high depreciation vis-a-vis dollar. So these two, so nominal growth in dollar, which is what we count as the dollar growth in terms of GDP expressed in dollar, was also very low at about 6% or so. As a result, the growth, which was required to be about, in dollar terms, about 8 to 9%, turned out to be much lower, and India ended up being at about 3.56 trillion at the end of 23-24, as against expected 4.6 or 4.7 trillion. That was a very large shortfall. But to address to your question about the COVID, so COVID had a massive impact in the sense that not the COVID itself, but the government's decision on how to deal with the COVID was the principal reason responsible for the great contraction of about 6%, which we had in 2021. And I have a very simple example to make this clear. During wave one, during COVID wave one, which was in the first quarter of 2021, the government sort of decided to use a big hammer, closed the country completely, locked it down, shut down. In fact, if you want to use a better expression, it was it was the most stringent lockdown anywhere in the world. The result was that the economic activity suffered. In the first quarter of 2021, we had a negative growth of 25% in a quarter. That's devastating. I think that decision to use such an unimaginative, such a destructive sort of shutdown, lockdown, was the responsible reason for negative growth of 6% in 21-22. Even in nominal terms, would you believe, and this is incredible, in nominal terms also, 2021 growth was negative.
Yes.
Now, whereas dollar appreciated. So as a result of the kind of decision, and you can always sort of contrast it. How did the government deal with the COVID wave 2, which was in 21-22? Despite massive suffering, deaths, infections, the government decided not to lock down the country. The economy functioned. And that made the difference that in 21-22, the country recovered, a kind of V-shaped recovery which took place in 21-22. And that is the difference, I think, which made. I don't hold COVID responsible for this disastrous performance. I think it was government's mishandling of the economic situation.
I understand. And okay, now moving a little bit away from the government, although even this is linked to the government, another theme in your book is to do with the complete visible lack of animal spirits in the private sector. That is, private sector investment has not been happening. And we know that so far it's been kind of tepid. It's not been very enthusiastic. But do you feel that this lack of enthusiasm will continue? And so we'll kind of miss our mark on the $10 trillion target as well?
So, Sharad, I think I've quoted that famous statement to Nirmala Sitaraman, where she was trying to egg on the industrialists, the private sector, calling them sleeping Hanumans to revive their animal spirits and all, which indicates that the government was also acutely aware of the lack of enthusiasm in the private sector to make investment into the economy. And as all of us understand, investment is one of the two big factors of generating growth in the economy, besides improving productivity of the investments. So, and the government also took decision to sort of neutralize partly the lack of investment in the private sector by increasing the public sector investment. So the government was acutely aware, but it's also a fact that by the time the Modi 2.0 ended, there was no return of the animal spirits or the private sector investments in the economy. So what happens? Why did it happen in this way? During the entire period of 5 years, and even still that continues to my mind. I think there are three reasons why there is lack of animal spirit or the private sector investment in the Indian economy. To the it's not that there is absence of we still have capital formation of 60, 70 lakh crores a year, but the growth is not there. The spirits or that gung ho, the evil intention to invest the growth into the growth is not there. The three reasons. One, to my mind, is the fact that the mainstream economy, which is to supply the demand, to meet the demand of the people for the traditional goods and goods, basically like clothes, food, steel, cement, all of that, which is a normal run of the economy, so to say, which represents in a way a kind of mature industry where the investment will take place only if the demand outstrips the supply from the existing level of investments. And this is very well captured in what that RBI also brings out, a capacity kind of utilization survey, which has stayed, as you would know, for last 5 years at the level of 75% or 76%. So without changing. So this means very clearly for the traditional mature industries, the demand in the economy is less than what the existing level of capacity can easily service. And therefore, private sector or the businessmen or industrialists are in the business of investing only if they can provide, they can sell their goods which they produce and generate profit. If they don't find the demand to be there, and which is not likely to generate any profit to them, there is no reason why they would make the extra investment. Whatever is the demand, there is still investment taking place in steel, cement, textile, some sort of textile industry. So, but that is only a maintenance kind of keeping up with the growth in the demand. That kind of investment is taking place, but nothing which represents the so-called animal spirit.
Right.
The second thing, second reason to my mind is that in the world of today, there are primarily three big drivers of investments. One is the digital economy, whether you take semiconductors or chips or computers or smartphones, or whatever, that entire space of electronics and digital. That is one which is where the world is investing, and which is where the growth is also coming largely from that area. That investment is hugely dependent upon the ability or the generation of new technology. The technology of smartphones, technology of computers, technology of semiconductors, chips, or whatever. And in this space, India, unfortunately, has no technology base. It can get from others, like we are doing in semiconductors or others, but it does not have the leaders or the promoters' incentive of technology, owners' incentive, which it can use. And therefore, we have had investments in this space, but that is relatively minuscule compared to what the world is investing. The second space where the world is investing today is the investment in environment and energy transition space. Whether it is electric vehicles, or whether it's solar, or whether it is wind, hydrogen, pump storage, and whatnot. So that is the area where a lot of investment is also being made. That again is an area where other countries are the leaders. For example, in this space, China is a big leader of technology. We import 80% of our solar panels and cells from China. China is capturing the global markets for electric vehicles. We have no real presence. That is the reason why the private sector is not investing. If private sector is allowed, unfortunately, the policy also is coming in the way. We don't want to do business with China. We don't want Chinese companies to make investments here or even sell their products wherever we can stop them. For example, today's newspapers, I think, documents the story of how China is capturing the Asian EV market, but we don't want the Chinese companies to come and sell in that. So in this entire space of environmental and energy transition investments, which is where the world is investing, again, Indian businesses find it very, very small, very little to do it. Last, I said three reasons why the investment. The third big areas of investment is in the for the private sector is the investment in the building of electronic digital networks, so to say. It is different than the electronics manufacturing. And today, the largest space in that is in what we call social media, e-commerce, and others. And that's again, we are conversing on StreamYard, or we do a lot of Zoom talks, everything you take it, or the WhatsApp, or the entire conversation technological space which connects the world. The investment is by American companies or Chinese companies. There is no single platform which Indian businessmen can or have built in. So I think these are the three big areas of investment, which unfortunately I think the private sector has not been in a position to because they don't either own technology or they don't have the ability. So that is the reason why the investment. Last, as I said, three reasons for not investing. The last one is we have a very captured situation in infrastructure space, where a lot of investment can come and should come from because this is all domestic as well. whether the investment is in transportation, or investment is in energy, space, or ports, airports, and all of that. This is a big area, and the government is also making investment in this. Private sector is also making investment in this space, but the speed and the extent of investment is much smaller, because that this is the sector which is where the highest sort of political cronyism is present. If you want to do power business, you have to have a lot of government permissions for land, or you have to get land, or you sell to the government. For example, in power produced, you have to sell it to the government, or you have to recover payments, and not many businessmen can actually game or do business with the government in this murky space. Only the brave hearts like Adani's can do it, not others. So that is the reason why the investment in this space is also much smaller. So I think there are valid reasons, and by the way, all of them are addressable. If we want to address, we can address them, and then we can see the kickstart of the investment in the private sector. But for that, you would need to have a massive change in the policy frame.
I understand. And now, to capture all of this, my final question is basically there have been a lot of predictions about the size of our economy by 2047. For example, the former chief economic advisor KB Subramanian has said that we'd be 55 trillion. We can be 55 trillion in size by then. Piyush Goyal, our commerce and industry minister, has said that we could be 35 trillion by 2047. Do you feel that these targets are unrealistic?
Sharad, I find honestly these things to be extremely amusing. Right. The guys who are responsible for getting us to 5 trillion in 6 years are the guys who are making this kind of hypocritical, if I may call it, number jumping, which are arithmetical progressions and not economic progression. If you can't deliver, if you can't take your economy from $2.7 trillion in 2018, 1819 to 5 trillion by 24-25 in 6 years, which is not even doubling, right? And this goal of 5 trillion is most likely now, the way we are going, to shift to about 28, 29, or at best 27, 28. That if we take the in actual thing, a 2.7 trillion to double to about 5 trillion plus, we take 8 to 9 years, then these kind of number spewing is ridiculous, to say the least. And I must also make one observation here. The $5 trillion was announced in 2019 prices of dollars. Right?
Yes.
Dollar is also depreciating, right? So today's dollar is not the dollar of 2019. So if you were to depreciate the dollar to 2019 dollar, the 5 trillion becomes actually about 6.5 trillion, right?
Right.
So to reach from 2.7 trillion in current prices of 2018-19 to $6.5 equivalent to trillion dollar equivalent to 5 trillion of 2018-19 in current prices of 20 in current prices, you will probably not reach this goal by 29-20, which is that we will take more than 10 years or 10 years to actually do $5 trillion goal. So I would with all sincerity at my command, uh, suggest that all this intellectual gymnastic about it's not even intellectual, honestly, it's only unintelligent arithmetical gymnastic, if I may call it, of
Right.
55 trillion, 45 trillion, 25 years from now, is sheer nonsense.
I completely understand. But on that note, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. And to everybody watching, please look out for the $10 trillion dream dented in your bookstores and go buy it. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you so much, Mr. Garg, for joining us.
Thank you, Sharad. Always pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.